So welcome to Pivot Chat number 6. Today, you got me and only me. And what we're talking about today is the pivot I'm calling this episode, the pivot behind Pivot Chats. So I have mentioned briefly, and I'll be sharing my story in snippets as we go, because I think, number one, just to give full clarity, I started a pivot this summer around, it's hard to keep it straight, but I want to say it was around May or June that I started like feeling the pivot coming on. And I'm still integrating what I've decided to change. I've only implemented a few things so far. I've said this several times, like so much of the external result of my pivot is fairly minor to people who are following me, very minor to my clients. That's all still existing and running and doing, but also very big for me behind the scenes. And so there's lots of things that I want to share. And I'm very clear that the lessons and the learnings and the things that I think are helpful to share from my experience are going to come in pieces, and there's different themes and different lessons to share. So I'm not going to give you a step-by-step process of what I went through. I don't even really remember all of the details, but I have some themes that are coming up that I really, really want to start sharing now, as it's still fresh and as it's still happening. And to be honest, as I said, I'm still integrating. And so part of why why I wasn't the interviewee of the first episode is because it was still sort of in process in my brain. And I didn't really have the words yet to articulate this pivot that I just went through, because it was pretty big for me on the inside, or on the inside behind the scenes in my head, and really with my team as well. And I do have a lot of clarity now. I do know generally the direction that I'm going in, and I've moved in that direction, and I've started taking a lot of action. Pivot Chats is just one of the sort of outward results or examples of this pivot. And I do have stuff to share. And so one of the things that I want to share today is like this concept of sharing, of moving forward when you don't have all the clarity, but you have some clarity. That has been one of the driving values that I have had in this business. Really, it's sort of how I live my life, but it's how I've decided to run this business. One of the values that I hold very dear. It's also something that I coach and teach my clients to implement in their business, because I think what we kind of want to do, what the brain wants to do to keep us safe, and what we sometimes think we have to do. You've heard me, if you've been in my space for very long, you've heard me say this, is like we think we have to have clarity, meaning full clarity and like a big fat plan and all these details in order to move forward. And I think the blessing and the charge, honestly, of entrepreneurship and the people who are the most successful in this area, and I don't just mean from a financial standpoint, for me, success is also deep fulfillment and a beautiful impact on the world. People who are truly successful follow this practice. I didn't make it up. I like it and it works for me. And I think it's really helpful. But this concept of like, you don't need full clarity in order to move forward. And that's how I've created Pivot Chats. And so I really want to share right now in this moment, sort of what I know and what I don't know about my pivot, and normalize that experience. And how I have moved so much further forward by taking action on my half-baked ideas, by moving forward and taking action based on my tiny bit of clarity, not my like full amount of clarity. I know generally where I'm going, but I don't know all of where I'm going. And that's enough for me to move forward. And in fact, this is not a new concept if you followed me for any period of time, but I'm living it, and I'm really sharing this with you right now in the middle of my half-baked or like 80% baked idea, or pivot or thought process, which is let's move forward when we're in the mess, when we're sort of, once we know a little something, we can move forward. And I believe, and this experience is absolutely validating that for me all over again. I believe it's actually in those actions that I've received more clarity, right? So as I move forward with pivot chats, I'm going to talk about this in a little more detail, I get more clarity. I get more definition around what I want this to look like in the future and who I want, like what kinds of stories I want to be telling. And when this moves into podcast land officially, how I want to position it and what's even the point, like what are we even doing here? Why? I didn't know exactly why I was doing it when I started. So I really want to normalize, like, not just the messiness of pivots, but like the messy action, the imperfect action, that I think is how we play the game when we're running businesses. It's how we create, like creativity. Like, you would never look at an artist and be like, that line isn't, perfect, isn't a perfect right angle or whatever, right? Or what's that going to look like when you finish? Like, they may not know, like they're just following the process. Running a business is a creative process. Pivots are creative processes. And so pivot chats has been a hugely creative process. And it is by going through these actions of asking people if they would be interested in being interviewed, of talking to people to even learn about their pivots before I even decided to do these interviews, of how, having an interview, all of these things have helped me to move forward and to create more clarity for myself. Instead of thinking that I need to be deep in thinking mode and, oh, I got to be sitting on my couch and have extra white space so that I can, like, I know I want to do this thing, but I don't really know what to call it. And I don't know who should I be interviewing, and like feeling that I need to have a 10-step plan in order to get moving. And oh, by the way, feeling that I need to also have a podcast team in place, because I'm very clear I have some limitations with my neck, and I will not do the tech that's needed to get podcasts out into the world. There's some stuff to be done, and I want to bring somebody on to support me with that. So I don't need to have all of that in order to have the interviews, right? I don't need all of that in order to move forward creatively and start putting things out in the world. So that's number one. Just quickly double check. Okay. So I am living this. This is probably as messy, and I feel that I run a pretty transparent. I feel like I'm pretty transparent about my business, and but I do think there is. Look, I think a lot of people, particularly people who are in the personal growth industry, a lot of people share their own personal experiences on social media, in their marketing, as a way to express themselves and as a way to connect with their clients and their audience. And I think that's beautiful. I think a lot of other people are much more private and don't share, all the ins and outs of their experience. They might, share whatever is appropriate for them and for their business model. But I don't think that you need to share like all of your thoughts and personal experiences publicly, right? You have to find the right balance for yourself. And this is probably out. So not to say that I have not been transparent, but this is me about being as unprivate as I have ever been. Because I do like to have a fully thought out idea before I share it with my audience. That's what feels good to me. And because this really is about me, my service and my impact and my ability to support those of you who are my audience. And I don't want to make it about me. And so when I share something about me, it's typically not for me, even though for sure I get some catharsis out of it. It's typically for what's the lesson in my experience, and how can I share that so it positively affects my audience? But this is about as transparent or as open as I've been in the moment I've been in business now for 5 years. And that feels appropriate too, because what we're talking about here is pivoting. We're talking about what this experience is, and it is not structured and formulaic, and well, you do this and then you do this and then you do that, right? And so it feels appropriate for me to walk my talk here in a really clear way, because I am still half baked. I am still, like I said, 80% baked. That sounds like I'm high, but I am still mid thought in this pivot, in this process, particularly in terms of what am I going to do with it. And I really do want to share that with you while I'm doing it. So it will be interesting for me. I hope it'll be interesting for you. And because I'm recording this in November of 2022, this will live for however long I decide to allow it to live. And so, people could be listening to this in 2 years and see what Pivot Chats has become. Will it be the same title? Will it have the same mission? I don't know. I can't wait to see what it evolves into. But this is where we are now in the birth of Pivot Chats as episode 6. And this feels important to share. So I'm sharing. So I want to share really, let me just get my head straight. I have 3 things I really want to share, and I've really already started talking about one of them. So one of them is, please, please, please do not think that you need to have full-on clarity from a pivot in order to move forward. And in fact, I recommend the opposite. I recommend that there is, if we could oversimplify the pivoting process, I think there is a time period. Sometimes it's very quick. You go, oh, I don't want to do this. I know what I want to do. And you move forward, right? Oftentimes we have a sort of I don't want to do this anymore, but I don't know what I want to do. Or I do want to do this. I don't want to do this, but I do want to do this. But how do I get there? Whatever it is for you that requires the inward process, the conversations with your coach or your business partners or whoever it is that are your confidants, that are your thinking partners, there's sort of that phase of the process, if you will, not that it's linear, but there's this phase that is very inward, very brainstormy, very thinking through, looking for clarity. And that can get messy, and we can talk about that in another episode. But once you have some sense of clarity, and oftentimes people will come out of pivots with lots of different decisions, or I'm going to do this and I'm not going to do this, and I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do this differently. Once you start to have some clarity around one tiny thing, and I'm saying some clarity, my recommendation, ask yourself the question, is there an action I could take towards this that would support me in support of getting more clarity? So, and I specifically want to say about doing this in support of getting more clarity, because if I had said to myself, I've kind of always wanted to do a podcast, and I've also kind of always thought that in that podcast I would interview, in fact, what I originally wanted to call it was interesting people doing interesting things, because that's what the conversation that I wanted to be having. It is the conversation I'm having. It's just around a specific focus. And so if I had said, like, okay, I've always wanted to do a podcast, I want to do something different, I'll do a podcast, but I don't know what it is. That alone, that's actually not how I created this. I don't know why this is my example, but that alone is a little bit of clarity. Like, that feels like something fun to do now. It's been an idea on the shelf for a long time, which is totally appropriate. Everybody needs a back burner list or notebook. Mine is a notebook, millions of ideas. Okay, I'm going to take that one out of the notebook and start putting it into reality. But I'm only going to take a step at a time for the purpose of my clarity, because I don't have clarity enough to execute podcasts, but I do have clarity enough to start talking to people about it, or I do have clarity enough to start writing out what would I put in the podcast, or whatever it is that you feel good about. So ask yourself that question. When you start to have a little bit of clarity, what action can I take in service of more clarity around this particular thing? That is absolutely one of my best practices and one of the biggest pieces of unsolicited advice that I give my clients, that I give my colleagues, that I give my friends all the time. Like, great, so get started. But I don't know what I'm doing. It's fine. Get started. How can you get started? Not for the purpose of finishing a project, not for the purpose of tasks, not for the purpose of being productive, not even, my friends, not even for the purpose of making an impact yet, but for the purpose of your own clarity. And I think sometimes when we can make it a little selfish, it's actually easier to move forward because it's like, okay, it's not for somebody else. So I don't have to have it all figured out. I don't have to be my, buttoned up, wise coach self right now. I can just be in exploration mode and ask people for help, which is what I did. And there's something about that, taking that action for the purpose of getting yourself more clarity that will, by the way, help you find more clarity. I'm just going to check my notes and see if there was something else I wanted to share about that. So yeah, specifically with me, and then I will backtrack to what sort of started this pivot. Specifically with me, when I had this idea, because I was in the middle of a pivot and I really did want to have this I wanted to be talking to people, not just about my pivots, but about theirs. This is a shared experience. And I was feeling the lack of this in the online space. There's a lot of like, I pivoted to start my business messaging, right? Or I pivoted from this kind of coach to this kind of service, right? From one thing to another, and why it was a good idea and why it was successful. I think that's really, really normalized and really, it's out there for a lot of small businesses. There's a lot of conversation about that, but it's all after the fact. It's all after the fact, and why this is perfect. And it's the pretty thing that makes you look like, from a marketing perspective, like you are the person that you are, right? And it's not a lie. It's absolutely true. It's absolutely aligned. It's those pivots that had us start our businesses in the first place. And so I don't want to diminish that. Like, these are huge, powerful pivots. I talked about this in last week's episode. But that end result, that headline of like, I made this pivot and now my life is perfect and now my business is the thing it needs to be, which may be true, maybe not the life is perfect thing, but like, absolutely pivoting brings us into alignment. But it's really, really easy to write that as a headline. And nobody's talking about the process that fucking got you there. Nobody's talking about what happened underneath that. Nobody's talking about the inward, sometimes existential experience that we go through when we feel the need to change and we maybe don't know where we're going, or we feel the need to change, but man, that is a big change and it's going to take us a minute to move into the new. It's not easy. But nothing worth doing is. Not many things worth doing are, I would argue. And I don't really subscribe to like life needs to be hard or anything like that. But when you're in a creative process and you're doing work you love and you're doing your life's work, however you want to call that, like, it's fucking personal. And so for me, I knew that this was one of the things that I wanted to be having a conversation about, partly because I felt that people weren't talking about it, partly because even if, and this isn't to say like there probably are people out there talking about it, they're not on my news feed. And it pissed me off. So the very first thing I did is I started having deep conversations with smart people, my coach, my team, my partner, my best friends, some colleagues. I just reached out to people and said, I just want to have a conversation with you. And sometimes I asked them questions because I knew they had gone through a pivot. Sometimes I gave them my messy thoughts and said, what do you think? And I got some really good advice. I got some really great insights. I did carefully curate the people that I spoke with, but that got me started. And then once I realized I wanted to be having these conversations, I didn't know how to start a podcast. I still don't. Don't have a podcast yet. I'll get the right help to get that out the door. That's just execution, right? but what's the content? Who am I talking about? What do I want to be a thought leader around? Who am I a thought leader? What am I a thought leader around? So I started talking to people and saying, like, if I were to do an interview series, would you let me interview you about this topic? What would it look like? So then that helped me go, okay, now I know who I want to interview for the first batch. Every single person, is this true? Yes, every single person who's been interviewed so far, and every single person as of today, November 30th, who's on my website for in the up next category, you can see that towards the bottom. Every single person I went after, I asked them, and in many cases, I already knew them at some level. And I knew that they would make a good guest, and I knew that we could have a valuable conversation because we had already had valuable conversations. Some are clients, some are colleagues, some are people who I had just recently met but deeply connected with quickly. And so then so all that is to say, then I started saying, like, okay, I choose you for my first batch. I want to have some interviews. Now that I have, or I don't know how many now, 4 episodes, maybe 5 interviews recorded, I now know kind of what I'm looking for my next batch. And I've evolved my thinking around what kinds of conversations I want to have here. So for example, I started off by saying, hey, if you've been through a pivot, apply. Send me actually, before I even had an application link, I just said, send me an email, right? Or reach out to me, have a coffee chat. What I quickly learned is that this isn't, at least right now, this isn't a space to talk about how you pivoted to start a business in most cases, because that's what everybody did, right? So we're already all together in that level playing field. We started a business, great, awesome. Now, pivot chats for me, I want to have a conversation about, well, now what? What happens when you did do the thing, right? You found the thing that you're meant to do, and you've been doing it for a while, and you feel this change come through you, this creative pivot, I've been calling it lately, this call to follow your fulfillment. And like, it can be really, really cool and inspiring. And sometimes it's like, oh shit, here it comes, right? That's those are the pivots that I want to be talking about. The ones that Sarah Stokes shared in episode 2, where she had a successful marketing business and a coaching business as well. She closed her marketing business. She closed a successful business because she'd just done it. She was complete fulfillment-wise, creatively. She was complete with that work and really wanted to focus more time on her coaching. And so she did, right? These like seemingly like unpopular, or like, that's not a smart decision, that's not the thing that you're supposed to do for, pure financial security or whatever. That was frankly a rebellious act, I would argue. She did it in service of her fulfillment. And that's what the conversation that I want to be having. So that's how, but the point of this full move forward before you get full clarity conversation is, I never could have gotten to the reality, to the decision, or maybe I could have gotten to the realization that there were certain kinds of pivots I wanted to talk about and certain kinds of pivots I didn't want to talk about. But I think I got there way faster and easier by just having conversations with people. And it was probably more efficient because now I've got stuff recorded versus sitting in my thinking mode for so long before moving forward, right? So now I have all these episodes and people are able to benefit from them, to reach out to me to say, I want to be a guest. And now I know what to tell them and how to like explain to them what I'm looking for and what would make a good guest. Is that making sense? Okay. So that's really the first main point I want to drive home is I am building this airplane while I'm flying it. And in many ways, I've been doing that for 5 years in business. In many ways, I've been doing that for 46 years in life. But there's so much value in this approach. I'm not saying it's easy. And my level of risk and adventure is different. I don't need a lot of perceived security and sameness. I'm really very comfortable just making big change. So the way that I'm doing it may not work for you. And take a slice of it. Where can you take some action for yourself without having it all figured out? I promise you. And sometimes, again, that action for me, this go round, those actions were reaching out to people and just having a conversation, right? I wasn't asking them to buy my coaching services. I wasn't asking them really to do anything in the beginning. Eventually, I said, I would love to interview you. Would you be open to it? But I slowly built myself into that space because I didn't even really know what I was doing. So I just started having conversations. And I think this, like, being able to say to somebody, I have some clarity around this, but I'm still creating, right? I don't love the word, I don't know, but I'm still building what this is going to look like. I'm still thinking it through. So I'm open to ideas, and I'll have to come back, like not even having to commit, I'll have to come back to you. Your story is interesting. Let me keep thinking about what I want this to be, and I'll reach out to you and let you know if I want to interview you for Pivot, for this interview series. Okay. Hopefully that point is clear to you. It's something that I've talked about before, but I'm really living it right now. And I just want to talk about it now while I'm in it. The other thing is I'm still building out what this is going to look like in the long term. So as I've started this out, because I've always done lives inside my Facebook group, this is a live stream inside my Facebook group. And it's also being shared on my website, so that if you're not in the Facebook group, you can still benefit from this. And eventually it'll probably be a podcast, on Spotify and Apple, et cetera. But the way that I'm going about it, and how I started out by interviewing people live, and now I'm doing more solo episodes live and interviewing people as recordings, like that's all evolved as I've gone. I did not at all have that planned out. And that's not to say that you have to do everything without a plan and that winging it is the best way. But for you, whatever little, I would just encourage everyone, because most people are not as wingy as I am, just where can you wing it a little more? Where can you take that one action, have that one conversation, put that one post out there just to see? That might help you to receive feedback from other people, or even to receive what you don't want. That's always very helpful for me. People applied for Pivot Chats and I was like, ooh, that doesn't feel like the interview that I want to have. Let me think about why that is. And so that's helped me now in the application process. I have parameters and I say, please, this is what we're looking for in terms of guests. And I have sort of things to be thinking about and ways that I ask you to share your Pivot Chat, your pivot. Okay. I think I've driven the clarity point home. So there's two other things that I want to share today related to the experience that I had in this particular pivot. So I've gone through a million different pivots in my life and in my career. In this particular pivot this year, something happened. One of the questions I've been asking my guests, my interviewees in Pivot Chats, and I'm going to keep asking this question. One of the questions I keep asking is, what's your tell? How did you know, or how do you know typically when a pivot is coming? And I love this question because I'm getting kind of a variety of answers, and that's because we're all different and we all experience change differently. Several people have talked about ooh, I feel it in my body. But what does that feel like, and how does it manifest, and where are you noticing it? It's all different. For me, pivots tend to come in the form of some sort of what I call burnout symptoms. So I love my work. I love my clients. I love my coaching. I did not have a love relationship with social media when I first started this business. I spent the first, I think, 2-ish years primarily marketing myself in networking groups and in-person events and speaking engagements and things like that. A little bit of social media. When I moved to the island, I pretty much flipped that. I 10% others was no in-person, but 10% virtual marketing and virtual networking and speaking, and 90+% marketing myself on social media. And I had to really work that through with my mindset and find a way to get, because I wanted to live here. And that was at the time, there were very few virtual networking opportunities. Luckily now I have a beautiful blend of both, because COVID happened and created a lot of virtual opportunities. And I now know some entrepreneurs on the island, but that was really the only option I had. And so I really worked hard to find a way to use social media that felt good to me and juicy. And I went to the whole other end of the extreme. I found myself loving it. I was like really grateful for the ways that I could connect with people. Most of my clients I met on social media. It's pretty amazing. And I think I'm of the age where like I've done the online dating thing, and people my age have done that, but it was kind of a weird thing for us in our, I don't know, by the time it really didn't start to be normalized until maybe my late 20s, early 30s. So that was something for people of my age group to get used to. And I did the same thing with social media for my business. It took me a while to get used to it. It took me a while to sort of find my groove. That's partly why I created this Facebook group, because I really wanted to feel like a sense of community instead of like I was talking at you into the nothingness. What happened this summer was I lost the mojo for social media. And I know a lot of people have talked about this, and a lot of people, hate it and say, I'm not going to run my business on social media. And I don't think that you have to. But that was the very strong strategy that I was using, and it was working. And I had a whole team built around getting social media up and out the door. And in fact, I was interviewing copywriters to beef up my team, to relieve the pressure on my neck and shoulders. Conversation for another day, but if you've followed me for any period of time, you've heard me talk about this a lot. About a year and a half ago, I injured my neck, and it still affects at some level, my ability to do typing and clicking on the computer. So like Zoom is fine. Thank God. Coaching clients is fine and comfortable, but computer work is really hard. And I have written my own copy for 5 years. And so that was a burden. Yes, you can voice dictate. There's all kinds of things, but that was a burden. And my team, thank you to my team, past and present, for all that you did to support me in that time period, especially. My team really rallied, and we got creative, and we figured out ways to keep getting content out. A lot of times we would repurpose. And so I think the burnout started with my, having gone through that time period for so long. I really didn't think the neck injury was going to be a year and a half recovery period. I thought it would just be a few months. And so each like quarter, we'd be like, we're almost there. Like, it'll be fine. We can go back. Like, I finally had to realize, like, this is not something I'm going to go back to doing the way that I was doing it, because it wasn't sustainable for me. And so I started interviewing copywriters, and in those conversations, and I mentioned this in episode either 3 or 4 with Kendall Cherry, I mentioned this because in part, my conversations when I was interviewing copywriters to bring them onto my team, what I didn't realize it at the time, but it started to move my thinking forward, because I realized yes, on the one hand, my business has grown and my team has grown, and my neck has decided not to function. And so it's time for me to start outsourcing at least some of my content writing. And I had a lot of content writing that people could, really, I felt that it was an appropriate time in my business journey to do that. But as I was talking to them, I realized that I was actually quite disconnected from my content. And that finding a person to write for me was not going to solve that problem, right? And it was just sort of something that slowly but surely started to occur to me. And when I realized it, so it was like, the neck thing was a piece, right? Also, by the way, my team grew massively. So I was spending a lot of time in that time period focusing, I don't want to say focusing on my team because my team had it. But there is some effort involved in running a team. And I played around with having an OBM run my team. I played around with me running the team. I had several different iterations and like team structures as playing around to just sort of see what works the best. So I was spending a lot of time on team stuff. And then we were repurposing a lot of content. So I think that also added to me feeling a little disconnected from my content, because the longer the injury happened, the repurposing was coming from more and more and more backdated stuff, and kind of just felt like the old me. It didn't feel like the current me. And then the interviewing of the copywriters, as we were talking about, like the content that we would be having them write about, and the topics that I want to talk about, and all kinds of things like that. And I realized in those conversations, or in that process somewhere along the way this summer, I was just burnt out of social media. And what happened was I just didn't want to do it anymore. I just couldn't bring myself, you guys. And this isn't to say that anything I was putting out felt rote or uninspired. I still, and I've gone back to look, like I still was when what I was saying, writing and video, what I was putting out still felt like me. The repurposing felt just like the old me, not the current me. But I couldn't bring myself to create new content. I just couldn't do it. And I was putting a lot of pressure on myself because my team, I write the copy, my team takes it from there. They scheduled everything, they put it into email, they do all the graphics, they do the stories, all of that, right? And, or I record the video and they put it up there. And my team was fantastic. They were doing everything they needed to do, and they were not bothering me. And when I got stuff late to them, they were still making it all work. And I'm so grateful to them for that. But that was really starting to wear on me too. I feel very protective of and supportive of my team. And I'm very grateful for the people who've been supporting me. And I felt like I was really letting them down and not giving them the opportunity to do their job at their best because I was late, or I was uninspired, or I couldn't bring myself to write copy, whether it was because my neck would hurt or because I just didn't have anything to say. And that really began for me the burnout symptoms. So if I couldn't bring myself to put copy out, something is wrong, because I have a lot to say. You guys know I've been talking for 48 minutes. I have a lot to say. I feel very passionate about my work. I feel very passionate about my clients, and I love coaching. I'm still a coach. But if I don't have anything to say, like, I really need to pay attention to that. And I felt really burnt out. I would go on social media, you look at your news feed, and I was just like, what are you people talking about? And then I started to get really frustrated. And this is not something that this is something I argued with myself about whether I would share, but I'm going to share it because I think it's really freaking real. I started looking at other business coaches, which I hadn't done in some time, but I think I was just looking for inspiration. I don't know. I found myself scrolling onto other business coaches, and I got really annoyed at and this is no judgment to anyone or to the industry. I'm still a coach. I'm still a business coach, but I think the social media will do this to you anyway. And I always tell my clients, like, to stay off in these moments, but I did it anyway. The conversations, the content that I was reading through did not feel that it had depth, did not feel like anything that I wanted to read. And I've been in business for 5 years, and I'm tired of I can't get any clients and running, I know the way to teach you how to get a client, or how to sell, or how to market yourself. I have it's all about affirmations, or it's all about making money, and it's all about, booking out your services, and all those are really important. That's how you run a business. But I was tired of that conversation. And I've never really been a business coach focused on sales and marketing anyway. And so I was like, am I even a business coach? I'm so bored of this conversation. I'm so burnt out of this industry. I can't bring myself to go on social media. And so I actually started posting on my Facebook, like personal page, and like avoiding everything else. So I say this not because I'm truly, not because I'm judging the industry, but I think sometimes when you can see someone out there doing something that you're doing and you understand why you're different from them, it helps you kind of ground back into who you are and what you do. And I think there's a lot of value for, by the way, the business coaches that do focus on new businesses and how to get started and how to sell and those are super valuable offers. And I took people up on those offers when I started my business because I too didn't know how to sell or market myself. It's just that's not the work that I do. And I still sometimes get people calling me looking for that type of work, and that's okay. But, I even got existential about it. Like, am I even a business coach? Because I don't really help people grow businesses anymore. And so I got all, and I share all this mess and I share all these thoughts because they're just thoughts. But I think it's really important. Every single one of these things are symptoms of burnout. Right. And thank goodness for my coach. Thank goodness for the people that I have around me. Thank goodness that I've experienced burnout before and that I caught it before it got even worse. And before it started affecting my clients, because what I kept getting clear on and I kept asking myself and going underneath the hood, and it was like there were two parts of my business: my coaching, working with my clients, doing my real work, was great. There was nothing wrong there, but almost all aspects of the running a business, like the important things like getting stuff to your team and putting content out and marketing, I did not give a shit. Totally honest. I could not care less. And I cared, of course, right? I cared, but I couldn't bring myself. I had lost all motivation. I had lost my mojo. I didn't have anything to say. And if you guys know me, if I have nothing to say, there's something going on. So that I want to share because I think that messiness is what is real. I think that messiness is so normal. I've had my clients tell me all versions of what I just said and more, but for their industry and for their specialty. And when you start to even go, am I a thing that you are? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. And I had a lot of shame in that. Am I even a business coach? What, am I a fraud? Like, what is even happening? Do I even, do I want to do this anymore? Or do I want to just sit here and see what clients come to me and just never do marketing again? I know a lot of clients are like, yeah, tell me how you do that, right? And I think there's people that can do that and certain business models that can do that. They can just do a bunch of marketing and then ride the coattails. But that's not, I think, very realistic for most people. And so I really want to share. There's lots of things that I did with that. Go after. Okay, now I know I'm burnt out. What am I doing? Number one, I pulled back from social media, and I'll talk a lot more about that later. But for now, I just really want you to sit with the burnout, because I think that's a very common, very, very common symptom of you're going through a transition, you're going through a pivot. That which you used to love, you don't. Or you don't enough, or you don't as much, right? Go back to episode 1 when Allison talked about, she had I think she gave it a number, but like a 10% dip in fulfillment. And that for her was enough, or a 2% dip in fulfillment. That for her was enough to go, something's wrong, right? Before it gets to burnout. So if you're feeling any version of these things, please, please, please know that you're not alone. I just shared my big fat mess with you, one of the layers of the mess. And I'm still alive and I'm still coaching, and I feel more connected to my business than ever. So sometimes you just have to ride the wave and process through, and please get a coach if it's not me, someone else. But I really, really want to share that burnout piece, because deep and it's real and it can really throw you. And it's just a symptom. It's not who you are. It is not long-term, as long as you do something about it. And for me, what I did about it is a story for another day. The only other thing I want to share here is the shame. I've alluded to this a little bit, but I think it's really important. And this is what actually got me pissed off enough. If you don't have anything to say on social media, I always say to my clients, like, what are you on your soapbox about? What pisses you off? Like, I bet you do have something to say if you really think about it. Which is what drove me to write. I think I wrote a couple posts a few weeks ago about, like, I don't care if you make money, because I only care if you make money if you're doing work you love and love running your business. I just don't give a shit about the fact that about your profit, unless you're covering your bases first with doing work you love and impacting the world in a beautiful way. And I just wanted to be like the anti-business coach post, because I was just so mad at the focus that we all often have on money. And when we drive forward with money as our number one driver, we miss the boat on all the other things. And I think fulfillment and impact have to come first. Profit follows right behind that. Different topic for another day. But I was getting really mad at the shame that I was having. And the shame I was having was, I help people through pivots. I help people through transitions. This is actually what I do for a living. And frankly, if I really look at it, I mean, I was a change management consultant when I was in corporate. Like, I've been helping businesses navigate change, deal with change that happened to you, deal with change that you want to create. My whole career, that's really what I've done. And yet here I am in another pivot and I'm judging myself for it. I talked about that a little bit last week. I was judging myself for it. Oh my God, what is wrong with me? Here I go. And because I do tend to change a lot. Here I go again. I just can't seem to figure this out. Right? No, I have figured it out. This is just the evolution of me as a soul and a practitioner and a coach and a business owner. And it's time for me to do things a little bit differently. By the way, I'm still a coach. But the shame I felt and the feeling that I had needed to go through, like, I didn't tell my clients I was going through a pivot. And I think that's appropriate. I think there's an appropriate amount of privacy. And, again, back to the beginning, what I said in the very beginning of this conversation, I don't think we need to share every single thing that we're going through. But I do think it's very easy to be in the online space and to sugarcoat or to headline things, because there are character limits and there's only so much you can say in a tiny little chunk of a post or a video. But I really wanted to talk about the real stuff. And I felt a lot of shame being in this pivot this summer, where I felt like there was only my coach and my partner that I was talking to about it. I did not know where I was going. I was a little nervous to sign any new clients. I was still marketing myself a little bit, but I was really nervous to bring on a new client, even though I was still loving working with my current clients. I was nervous to bring new people on because I was like, well, what if I decide to stop coaching? I didn't think that would happen, but I actually put it on the table. And so that shame that I felt is and then I got mad that I was feeling shame, because I was mad that my clients feel the same shame when they're going through this. This is what I help people do. And I just got really mad about it. And sometimes anger or negative emotions can help us create. Is it Robin Roberts? I think is her name. Always talks about make your mess your message. And I just think that's so beautiful. And so my mess, I was like, why are my clients coming to me? And of course, like, I think having a coach during a pivot, that's what I do. One of the big things that I do. It's very valuable, right? But why do we only get to talk to our small circle about our pivots, right? I could argue there's value in having a small group. When you're confused, you don't need 75 people's opinions, right? But why is there shame in it? If so, that's what really created for me. It was me being pissed off, and me feeling shame around I'm not doing something right. I talked a lot last week about last week's episode about like, we all feel like we're not doing the pivot right, or we're not transitioning right, or something's wrong with us that we're pivoting, right? So I really wanted to normalize that. If you haven't watched that episode, please catch that last week. That was episode 5. But it was really that shame that I was feeling. And then I got pissed off that I was feeling shame, and pissed off that my clients were feeling shame, and that any of us feel that we have to quietly and secretly have our pivot. Again, it's okay, I think, to have a pivot in private. But I wanted more people to be talking about the experience, so that, because it really doesn't need to be shameful. I think pivots, one of the reasons I've chosen to work with people in their pivots is because I think change is like the most beautiful transformational experience. And I think most businesses create a bigger impact on the world. And for sure, they create more fulfillment for the business owner when they go through a pivot. This kind of creative pivot, if you will. And so there's so much beauty on the other side, but the process itself is not understood very well. And that is what I'm here to do. That is why Pivot Chats was created. And that is why I got really fucking pissed off, and why I created this, this space for people to share their stories, where I will continue to come in and talk more and more about the experience of change, the experience of pivots, what it looks like, what it feels like, what's normal, ways that I'll be offering, tips and all kinds of ways that you can navigate your pivots with more ease. But for now, I just want to share that, because I think the work that we all do is so deeply personal, or when you do work that's so deeply personal, you better believe you're going to have some experiences like this. And there is no shame needed in it. It's okay if you feel that. But if I can help one person through, and I will say too, people who have been interviewed have already come back and told me, like, going through that process of just being interviewed and sharing their story has been very helpful for them. So I think we're paying it forward at so many levels here. And what I love about Pivot Chats is, and I didn't realize this when I had the first idea, but because I kept moving forward with a little bit of action to gain a little more clarity, what I've realized is it's sort of become a project that really highlights my 2 biggest values in running a business, which is focusing on fulfillment and impact first. Because your fulfillment is actually what's driving your pivot, or your lack thereof. Lack of fulfillment is driving your pivot, right? I was feeling burnt out because the back end of my business, by the way, was set up really beautifully, but I just didn't want it the way that it was at that point. And so I'm building something different. It worked for me when it worked for me, and it's not working for me now, so I'm changing it, right? So thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, whatever it is that you're doing. Pivot Chats is for you. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have a topic that you want me to share related to pivots, feel free to put a comment here in the group, or to send me a private message. Not everybody, lots of people are feeling the shame. So if you're not comfortable sharing that publicly, please feel free to send me a private message. You can also email me. I will keep talking about this. I'm seeing a comment right now that says, you, like everyone now, are going through healing. Absolutely. Absolutely. This healing originates. Oops, let me just see if I can read this. He's talking about trauma plays out to be healed in every life. Absolutely. These moments of depression and tears from nowhere. Yes, that's the trauma being healed for release. Yes, 100%, 100%. And what I didn't say, and there's so many elements of this pivot for me, but what preceded this burnout was absolutely a huge mindset and identity shift for me. I do walk my talk. I do a lot of mindset work and a lot of personal growth work with my coach and others. And that was actually what preceded it, right? So if we think about it from that perspective, which is a whole nother story for a whole nother day. Thank you, Craig. Stacey says, thank you. Enjoyed hearing about your journey. Thank you for listening. Thank you so much. So thank you guys. Again, if you have a question or something that you want me to cover, please send me a private message and let me know. I will be back here next week with another Pivot Chat, more interviews to come. And thank you for just sharing this journey with me. I look forward to the next week. Take care.